Welcome to the Josh Huisman Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Josh Huisman Podcast. It is good to be here with you for another week, and I have some encouraging devotional stuff for you today. I'm so excited to have an author in the room and on the podcast. Her name is Jill Smith. She's a first-time author, and she has written a devotional book called Nature Unveiled. It's 40 reflections on experiencing God's creation. And first off, before we jump into how I got you on here, I just want to say welcome to you, Jill, and congratulations on this book.
Thank you so much, Josh. I'm thrilled to be here, really. This is my first podcast, and it's my first book, and I feel like I'm along for the ride. I'm just enjoying every new adventure with this book. So.
Yeah. Well, we had never officially met. Our kids in Nashville are around the same age.
Yeah.
And so we had seen each other before at different sporting events that our kids were involved in as they were growing up.
Yeah.
But it was never a situation where there was an introduction or anything like that.
No.
But recently, I was at a conference called the CPE Conference, which is for authors, church bookstore owners, publishers, all these different things. And there was an open house session where new authors were having their books and things coming out. And I looked and I saw you and I went, I know that lady. And I was like, so I knew you're from Nashville because it's seen you. So I just walked up to you and you had a table set up with this book because it was a pre-release.
Right.
And just said, hey, an introduction and the whole thing. And I said, I would love to, since you're just down the street from the church,
truly.
I would love to have you come on to talk about the book. So, So I guess my first question would be, were you completely weirded out by me?
No, not at all. No. In fact, I was like, that's really wild that you are literally a mile away, and I've never walked in this building before, but I drive by it all the time. So it was just really fun even to walk in the studio and see your son and recognize him from the basketball court,
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. And I love supporting people in the community and the things that they are doing. Of course, we live in Nashville where there's just publishers all over the place, and there's opportunity if you want to do the hard work and write, there's a good opportunity that you can get some things published and put out, which I will just say this, as we jump into this book that you've put together here, Nature Unveiled, can you tell everybody just a little bit about your background?
Sure.
Because this book really gets into God's creation and then like pairing it with devotions and how God speaks to us through it. So
Right. So I feel like I need to start at the beginning of my life, and I just feel like God has been wooing me with creation. I just was always drawn to be playing outside and enjoying the sunset and just listening to the trees rustle their leaves. I just have always just been drawn to be outside, and that led me to lots of camps. And anytime I could be outside and learn, I just wanted to be there. And I ended up studying environmental biology in college. So I went to Taylor University in Indiana and just loved it so much. And I really had this desire to be a park ranger someday, out west somewhere, and I didn't really think that was a viable option for me, but I continued to go with it. And then that led me to get my master's degree in natural resources, where I did my master's work in soil science. And I literally think anything outdoors I could study and really enjoy. So it just kind of led me that next step. I became the forester here in Warner Parks, and which is in the Bellevue area.
Yeah.
And just took care of lots of trees and had just was over resource management of our beautiful park, and I'm just making sure that it just stays a beautiful resource for our community. And then I ended up becoming pregnant and decided to, it was time to be mom and leave that job behind. And so this book actually didn't start as a book. This started as just journal entries where God was just speaking to me, and he was using the things that I knew and making them alive to me, because he was infusing his word into what I was seeing visually. And so that's where they started.
Yeah. Well, that's really neat. For those who aren't familiar with the Nashville area, Warner Parks in the Bellevue area are just beautiful, awesome hiking trails, and just you can literally get lost in there. And there's been many times a friend of mine and I used to run through those trails all the time, and then age caught up with me. But because they're challenging.
They are. They're really steep. Yeah.
But it's just so beautiful. So the fact that you're out there and doing that work was a wonderful thing. And then you have your first child and step away from that. And so how many years from then, because your oldest son is how old now?
He's 20 now.
20 now. So so over the course of 20 years, you've been kind of writing these slowly but surely?
Yes. And so, because they were just journal entries that I'd get an idea, and then I'd just sit with the Lord and say, what is it you have for me in this? And I would just write pages and pages and pages. And I would condense it down to one page. And I'm like, that is good. And it wasn't because the words that I was writing was good. It was because it was true. And it was speaking to my soul. And I'm like, wow, that is good. And then he would give me another one 6 months later. Or he would give me a couple a year later. There was no forcing this. There was no timeline on when it would be done. In fact, in the early years of working on it, I thought, I don't want this ever to be done. I don't ever want that voice to be silent, and for me to have a beginning and an end to this. So this was a real step of faith for me to actually submit the book and say it's done for what it is right now.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's one of the things that I really like about it is there is a depth in each of the devotions that you write. And I know a lot of times authors have to meet deadlines, and they have to, get a certain amount in as quick as they can, a certain amount of pages and editing and all that.
Yeah.
But some of the best writing and things done, whether it's songwriting or books or whatever, or is when it's a slow burn, when it's able to just kind of change over time. And you even mentioned that you kind of go back and edit it a little bit and go back and change this here and there. And that's really neat. Yeah. If I could go off my own little tangent, because I write songs every once in a while, and I recently did a project. It came out over a year ago, but I did 4 songs where in the past, when I would write songs, I would write them pretty quick, get them together, arrange them, and then boom, let's record them. Yeah. But I had these 4 songs that I just started writing, and over the course of 4 years, just would go back and change them. And instead of writing a new song, I would just go back into the old songs and just change them. And then I finally got to the point I was like, you know what, I should record these. And they were like a slow burn process, and they've become my favorites because of that, because I know how much time and effort went into it, you know? And so do you feel any of that towards these 40 that you have in here?
Absolutely. I probably have a stack this big, this deep of papers that have been edits throughout the years, and God would give me some new insight into it, or a depth to it, or something else that needed to go in it. And so, I would kind of start over in a way. And I loved that process. I loved the process of writing and sitting and waiting for it to be unveiled, which I think the name of the book is so appropriate, because I feel like it was being unveiled to me, and for me to unveil it to others, And so,
Nature Unveiled, and it releases October
10th.
October 10th. And I would highly encourage all of our listeners to get this book and use it as part of your daily devotions. Yeah. And we'll probably get to this, because I'm going to ask Jill, are you going to write a part 2 and a part 3 and all that? You really have a series that you could totally do here. Of course, you're asking, or you're talking to somebody who has no knowledge about the stuff you're writing about.
Well, I do want to interject. My goal after many years, was to get 30. And I had gotten to 31 by the time I sat down with this publisher, Dexterity Books. And they asked me for 9 more. They wanted 40. And I literally chuckled to the Lord. And I said, okay, God, this is on you. Like, it took me 19 years to write 31.
Oh, wow.
And he gave me some really amazing ideas, some that were seeds that were on a piece of paper. Like, I would jot down an idea that I just never pursued. And some were absolutely brand new. And I had 9 written in a week.
Yeah.
So that felt like a bit of a miracle to me, because I was such a slow writer, and I was just, and for him to just reveal all those to me in a week, it just blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When you were writing this, and did you have a particular audience in mind for it, or were you thinking that I'm just going to kind of write this out and whoever receives it? Because off the top of my head, I was thinking, would men be interested in reading a book about nature? Or would women just specifically be interested? And I'm here to tell you, on the guy side of things, I love it.
Oh,
and
that's awesome.
I don't know a whole lot about nature other than just the beauty of it and the things that I enjoy. But you go into the depth and backgrounds of a lot. I mean, you're talking insects and plants and birds and all, and just giving kind of like how life is lived in that world.
Yeah.
And then you connect it to how God works in our lives.
Yeah.
And there's been more than a few times where I've gone to my wife after and been like, she's brilliant.
Oh,
for real.
That's amazing.
And she could testify to it, where I'm like, you got to read this Jill Smith devotion. And I'm not blowing smoke when I tell you, I think, and as a pastor, I read a lot of these things. I think it's one of the best ones I've ever read.
wow.
And that's why
I'm a crier. You make me cry. Totally.
and I'm telling people who if you're listening to this, you have to get this.
Yeah.
Because
thank you.
The best devotions are one that you're not saying the same thing here. Now, you're pointing people to Scripture. You're pointing people to what God has for us in life.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's wonderful. But you're presenting a whole different side of the world that most people don't get to to look into, and I love it.
So I didn't have a goal of a book when I started.
Mm-hmm.
So the goal of me writing was just God ministering to me. And so, and so when I would write, it was like I was writing down what I knew of both creation and of God. And it was just so beautiful, the way that they represented or, impacted each other. Mm-hmm. And so when I kept writing and I would, share something with a friend, they're like, this is really great. And I said, I know, I just love it so much, but I really didn't have an audience in mind. And then in this book finishing process, I thought, well, it's probably more appealing to a female than a male. And I've been really surprised that I've had men say, yes, this really connects with me. Mm-hmm. And I think it's largely because I'm not a part of the book. It's the biology that I'm teaching.
Right.
I'm giving you insight into the things that you see daily, but you don't understand it the way a biologist would. And connecting it to, the way we relate to each other, the way we relate to God, the way, just the Christian walk. I mean, and to have a visual, to understand it more clearly, and then to see God in it, I think has an appeal to everyone. So I'm grateful for that, because I was surprised by it, actually.
Yeah. Well, it is wonderful. And so, we're talking a lot about this book. What is a devotion that you put in here that really stands out to you in your writing process, that you look back on it and you just vividly remember, oh, I need to write that down? What's one of the devotions that stood out?
Well, it's the first one. And I intentionally put it as the first one in the book. And it's about stepping back into my life. I was working in a park, and it was my dream job. I loved everything that I did. I was teaching, children that are 3 years old up to adults, all different kinds of classes, working with college age and high school students, and then managing coyote populations and rehabbing old farmhouses and managing, tree pruning and planting. I mean, it was just a lot. And so every day just felt so interesting and unique. Mm-hmm. And to then become mom and to know that I really didn't want to do mom part-time. And I really wanted to throw myself all in. And so that meant leaving a job that I really loved. And so I was in this transition time period of, I have no idea what I'm stepping into, and a little bit fearful of how am I going to still relate to people? How am I still going to be in community? And so it just felt like a really uncertain time period in my life. And I was attending this ministry at our church called Women at Rest. It was a listening ministry. So we were just coming out for basically a silent retreat. And there would be someone speak about what it is to listen to the Lord. And then we would just go off on our own and just sit and read and do art and connect with the Lord. And then circle back around and just share what the Lord was teaching us. And I went to the back of the church. We had a little pond back there, and I looked up and I saw vultures circling. And a lot of people think vultures circling means there's some dead carcass on the ground. Well, it's not. It means that they have found a thermal heat source where air is rising from the earth in this pocket. And if they get into that thermal elevator, they basically just rise and hundreds of feet up into the sky. And I just watched them circle and circle with no care, no effort at all. And just was so drawn to that. Like, that is who I want to be in the Lord. Like, I just want to rest and allow Him to be that strength. And so that was the first one I wrote.
Yeah.
So.
No, and I love it. And that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about, where to me, from someone as an outsider, I'm like, I have no idea what my mind goes through. Exactly that. There's roadkill. There's something on the side of the road that they want to go get, and they see it, and that's it. But then you share that and you're like, oh my goodness, that is so profound.
Yeah.
In your world, you probably go, well, no, I'm just taking this knowledge of what I know,
right,
and applying it here.
Right.
But for me, that's where I was like, this is just like breaking new ground for me,
Yeah.
And I asked before we went on if I could read one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And it's a tie between this one, Kudzu, and the Mistletoe.
Okay.
Because I'm still going to talk about the Mistletoe.
Okay.
I won't read the Mistletoe, but we're going to talk about that one.
Okay.
And so, sorry for the awkwardness as you sit here
No,
and I read your words in front of you. She bases this one off 2 Corinthians 10:5. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ.
Yeah.
I've preached on this many times, and it is
Yeah.
something we talk about a lot. Of let's take our thoughts captive, and how do you do that? And you write about Kudzu.
Yeah.
And I seriously went into this going,
What is
what?
this?
What is this going to be? All right. So Jill writes, our minds regularly spin with all kinds of random thoughts and ideas. Some of these thoughts can seem harmless at first, but become deeply seated over time. A wayward thought might grow to alter the landscape of your mind if given permission. Thoughts are powerful, and when they are contrary to the thoughts of God, they can do great damage. Unmanaged thoughts are as problematic as kudzu vines. Kudzu, a non-native invasive vine, is known as the plant that ate the South. Though initially introduced to the United States both to feed livestock and to combat soil erosion, it is now considered a devastating pest due to its fast-growing nature. Kudzu outcompetes native vegetation. It easily overtakes large trees in search of sunlight, and it alters its new habitat by shading out and destroying the plants it dominates. When a wayward thought crosses your mind, do you recognize it? Are you able to uproot it so that its power over you is neutralized? Kudzu is native to several Asian countries where it is naturally controlled by diseases, insects, and other consumers. Displaced from its native habitat, kudzu grows rapidly, up to a foot per day, and it spreads to new locations by birds that consume and disperse its seeds. Removing kudzu from someone's property is feasible if the few vines and roots are dug up and the homeowner remains vigilant. Invasive plants and wayward thoughts must be identified and removed. Yeah. God has instructed us throughout the Bible to set our minds, make up our minds, turn our minds, and examine and renew our minds, because our minds are constantly processing information. As vigilant gatekeepers, our thoughts must be managed, or they will rule us. When our minds are controlled by the flesh, they are hostile to God. But when our minds are controlled by the Spirit, we have life and perfect peace. Is your mind peaceful and focused on Him? Does the Holy Spirit have unrestricted access to your thoughts? The next time you feel tangled and smothered by a wayward thought, remember that life and peace are promised when you give the Holy Spirit permission to remove it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's so good. And so tell me, Jill, when did you always have that thought, or did you about kudzu, or did you sit down and just...
No,
where did that come from?
I grew up in Michigan, so I wasn't very familiar with kudzu until I moved down to Nashville. And really, it wasn't until, visiting the South, my parents now live in Florida, driving through and seeing these natural areas just overtaken. And it looks like clouds. I mean, they are just all the trees are sadly overtaken by all these vines. And it's just, it just makes me sad knowing that there's very little biodiversity and that it can truly take down a forest because of how quickly it grows and because there's nothing to control it. And so, throughout my life, I've just taken these bits and pieces and they've had emotional effect on me. And so, God just brought that idea to me, I'm like, oh gosh, that is so profound, because if we're not intentional about taking care of the things that cross our mind, I mean, some thoughts just go in one ear and out the other. They don't actually take root. But sometimes we give these thoughts more weight than they should be given, or we agree with some of these thoughts that are not from God,
right, about
our identity or about the mistakes we've made. We can be our worst enemy, and to allow that to grow, just changes how we see ourselves, how we see God, how we see others, and so they have to be managed. We can't be on the sidelines with our thoughts.
Well, it is interesting with that you with kudzu, if it's just in its beginning phases, you even mentioned it can be removed.
Yeah.
But when it grows to the point where it just takes over completely, it just becomes not impossible, I guess, but nearly impossible. And my mind just goes to that when it comes to our thoughts, and whether it's negative thoughts or the things that are taking over. If we just allow them to grow and take over, and I know we're human beings, we do this all the time. And we're all guilty of something happening, or we get a text or a phone call or whatever it may be, and then we let our minds just run away with all the possible worst case scenarios that it could be. Right. And it takes over. Yeah. It's no wonder that we have record numbers of stress and anxiety and things going on, because we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Well,
and sometimes it's other people's voices, that are still running through our heads, through our minds, that we have given weight to, that we've believed a lie, and we've not combated it, come after it with the truth, and said, that is not true. And anytime that pops up, I am going to call it out as, an attack. I'm not going to allow Satan to have space or a seat at my table, I'm going to say no to that.
Yeah. That is interesting when you talk about people saying things, because there have been times when some people have said things to me with intent to harm, but then other times when they just said it as a joke, and then my mind took it as harmful. Right. And an example that pops up for me years ago, when I was younger and I was really starting, I played sports, but I was also involved in music and doing some different things. And someone had made a comment to me one time, man, you could do a whole lot of things, not all of them well, but you can do a whole lot of things. Yeah. And my mind,
you're like, thanks.
Yes. My mind took that over time. This is where the kudzu thing really relates. It's seemingly just a joke, non-harmful thing that over time, my mind turned it into, you can do a whole lot of things. You're just good enough to fail at everything that you do. And I let that go. So then when something would happen that was bad or negative or whatever it may be, there would be the devil with that voice in my head going, see, you can get there, but you're going to ruin everything you touch. And see how that evolved into just a seemingly harmless statement to me going nuclear with this whole thing.
Yes.
I mean, that makes no sense at all, but that is why that devotion, I think, resonates with me so well, so much,
Well, good.
So what about the mistletoe one? That one to me, and we don't have to read all these because I really want people to get the book and spend some time with it.
Yeah.
But I was fascinated. Why don't you just tell us where mistletoe comes from?
Well, I didn't really know mistletoe except for, something you hang at Christmas. When I lived up in Michigan, I'm sure there's mistletoe up there, but I don't remember seeing it.
Yeah.
And, mistletoe, if you're not looking for it, you'll miss it, but because it just looks like a part of the tree, but in the wintertime when the trees lose their leaves, these round green balls are up in the trees. So they have, they're a parasite, and the birds will eat the berries and then fly to a new tree and drop the seed. And that seed, if it gets lodged on the bark, will start to grow with water. And it will put a root into the tree, and it will hijack the tree's water and nutrition, and just live off of it. So it's a parasite. And so it couldn't live on its own, even though it is green and it can photosynthesize. It can create some food, but it often lives in the shadows of the tree. So it's really just a thief. And so at Ellington Ag Center, there's a few trees. I think they've all been removed now. And it was in the hairpin curve, if you've ever been through there. And they were all covered with mistletoe. And I thought, wow, that is phenomenal, that they're living together. And this tree is still large, and but it's covered in these parasites. And it dawned on me looking at those that, gosh, people don't recognize that that's mistletoe, one, and two, it's just kind of living undercover. It's not like a showy thing, like, look at me, it's just kind of there. And there's really, the tree is hijacked, so it has no opportunity to remove it, unless a branch drops or something. And so it just stirred my soul that, unforgiveness is that parasite, that we, when we can't forgive people, it just sucks from us. It just removes some of our life, some of our livelihood, it's always kind of there, until we truly are able to forgive and release. That's when we walk in that freedom. So,
yeah. And so if I'm understanding you right, the birds eat this, they poop it out.
Yeah.
And it lands on these trees.
Yeah.
And it becomes a parasite on these trees.
Right.
And you tie that to unforgiveness in our lives is like this parasite that latches onto us. I mean, it's literally crap.
Yeah.
Right?
It is. It really is.
So that's what mistletoe is. And so mistletoe deserves to be cut off.
Yeah.
It deserves to be hung in your house somewhere. And then, the mistletoe thing. Yeah. But I was like, so fast. I was like, oh my goodness. Like, I thought mistletoe was like fun and nice. And you're like, no, it's a parasite. I grew up on the south side of Chicago.
Okay.
And you said you grew up in Michigan too.
Yeah.
And I am sure that all this stuff exists in the North, or does it not?
I think it does. I just it's never drawn my attention. And so
I went to school for a few years in Mississippi, Ole Miss. And I remember, leaving on the, we're a kid growing up in the south side of Chicago, and you go down to the deep south of, and you're in Mississippi, and seeing like trees just completely grown over with vines and things hanging off. To this day, you would know what this stuff is. I don't know what this stuff is. I just remember going, what's the deal with trees here? And then now living here in Tennessee, in my backyard, I have these trees and there's these vines that wrap around them. And someone was telling me, like the ones with the hair that goes into the tree. I've like never seen this stuff when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so that's why I sing the praises of this book so much, is that you take things like that and you apply it and give it biblical principles for life.
Yeah.
That to me, I'm sure there's some who have written things in a similar vein, but in this sense, it really was profound for me. So I enjoyed it.
Oh, good.
So tell me a little bit about your family background. How long you've been in Nashville, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, so I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and went to school in Indiana, met my husband there at a church, and we really wanted to escape winter. So we started researching towns that we could get home, in a reasonable amount of hours, and so we ended up landing in Nashville, and we had already had a couple of friends here that were old roommates of my husband, and so we were able to visit, and so we were looking for jobs. We got the major confirmation when both of us got a job offer within an hour of each other. So it was like, okay, we are supposed to move, and we were broke. We were graduate students, so we had zero saved, and we were living on love. And so, our friends even got a U-Haul for us to send us down here because we had nothing. And so we've been here since 1997, and so we've been here a long time, and love Nashville. It's such a great town. It's changed so much.
Yes, very much
over the decades.
But I haven't been here as long as you have, so I've been here 17 years.
Okay.
But it just, even in that time, I've become, neither of us are, originally from here.
No.
So we're not like the unicorns.
No.
But I am finding myself more and more being like to my kids, this wasn't here when we moved here, and this wasn't here when we moved here, and
that's funny.
But now that you can't even, it's because everything is like that.
Right.
It's so many people and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
And so so you moved here, and then you had a couple kids and doing that work and all that. And so, when you hold up this book, as you were going through life, did you think that this was a path you'd go down?
It was a little bit of a dream at first, thinking that maybe someday this would be, someone said, well, why don't you just write a blog and share it that way? And I thought, no, I really want it in print. I really want people to hold it. I'm a paper girl. I love to hold a book. And so I just kind of continued to wait and continued to write. And so it really wasn't until 2022, January. God has never given me a word of the year. And that January, it was finished. And I knew exactly what that meant. I was supposed to finish this book. And so I started devoting more time to it. And he just made the connections. I didn't ever get a no. And that was really sweet because authors get lots of no's. And I attended my first writers conference, and I kind of left a little bit defeated, almost just hearing how difficult it is to get a book published. And I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to continue to step forward. And he just aligned everything so beautifully. I just
awesome.
felt like, he was the one working behind the scenes to make it all not feel difficult. And, that's so beautiful. And it just reminds you that, that God can work out all the things that are difficult and make them easy, and just, so that really grew my faith in this process. It's been hard. The editing process has been hard. But I just kept trusting and kept walk away and come back, just the whole process is hard. But it makes a refined product that I'm so grateful to be a part of. Like, I don't feel like it's mine. I feel like it's his. He just used me to write it. So
yeah, that's a good place to be. I mean, when you think about it, I wonder if a lot of first-time authors, or I don't know, maybe authors in general, go into writing a book with publishing being the goal when maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe the goal is writing the book, or the journey is writing the book, and if publishing comes along, let that be the reward, but maybe not the reason. But I could be wrong in that. I don't know. I've tried to dip my toe in the water a couple times on writing a book, and I'll get a chapter and be like, I'll put that down. And I've told people before, I just struggle on writing these chapters, when actually each week the sermons that I do at the church are one chapter a piece of a book. I mean, it's so disconnected in my brain. I got to get that kudzu out of my brain when it comes to that stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And so as you, this one hasn't even come out yet, right?
No.
As we're recording this, but it will be out here in beginning of October, and it's available everywhere, right?
Right.
And people can purchase it, and they will. And when they do, they're going to inevitably ask, are you going to do 40 more? And what are you are you just kind of enjoying it right now, or what are your thoughts on future things?
Well, actually, my next plan is associated with this book. And so I've started writing a free resource that will accompany this book for homeschool parents and, teachers that want the whole story. So I am going to just compile resources that will give the science and more in depth. And so they can both, have their child or read the child the devotional, and then have them study the material as well. So that's what I'm doing next.
Yeah.
So, but I do have an idea for a next book. But I hope it doesn't take me 20 years to write.
It's too early. Well, don't they say the first one's always the hardest and the longest, and so anything after that, you kind of have you developed a rhythm? And that might be, but it might be evidence, if you think about it. You said you wrote the first 31 over time, and then they said we need 9 more, and then you're like, all right, I know how to do this.
I know. Well, I am such a person that loves to do a lot of things, and so I'm always doing this and doing that. I've got lots of little businesses, and so I like a lot of diversity. And so, but that would really help me if I do want to stay in the world of author. Behind my name is writing in a rhythm. And when I wrote that week, it was every day. I was researching and reading and contemplating, and I loved that. I love to research, and so I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
But right now, I just feel like I'm trying my best to steward this opportunity the best I can, and get it into the most hands to help affect the most lives. I really want people to be able to walk out their front door and go, "I see you, God. I see you. I see you. You're speaking to me loudly. I know you more clearly."
Well, I just so admire the ability that you had in this to take the knowledge and the things that you've learned and researched, and then to kind of bring it down to like my level,
right? And
so that when I read it and learn about it, you're essentially teaching about nature, and then tying it into God's word,
right?
And I just think that's such a cool concept. And
well, my publisher said that it was really accessible, and I loved that word because I want it to be accessible to all readers. I want people to enter in and understand it, not feel like, oh, this is just really difficult science. Like I wanted it to be digestible.
Yeah.
And so
that's awesome. We have a guy in our church named Alan, and Alan's we kind of joke he's our resident theologian. He will never say that about himself, but he has a great saying when some of the messages and things we do, if in a complimentary way, if we're teaching on something that's difficult, he'll go, "You did a great job of taking that and putting it on the bottom shelf so everybody can reach it."
Everyone can reach it. Oh, I love that.
And that, at first you're like, well, what does that mean? But then you're like, wait a minute. Well, what's the goal here? What are we trying to do? And are we trying to make it as complicated and inaccessible for people?
No.
Or do we want everyone to walk out of that going, that I learned something in a way that I could learn it?
Yeah.
It wasn't over my head, and it wasn't trying to be. It wasn't a pastor or an author trying to sound how smart they are.
Right.
But and I think that's so valuable.
Yeah.
Well,
and I hope it'll appeal to people that are just drawn to science and then find God in it. So, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Well, definitely. And so I would encourage you to keep going and to keep writing and have all that. And then who knows, maybe one of these days I could say, well, I had Jill Smith on the podcast.
Yes.
as her first book, What are some final things maybe that you would want to share for anyone who's picking this up? I mean, you've kind of already gone over this, but maybe if you could, in just a paragraph, what do you want the readers of this book to walk away with?
Well, I think we have a God that is a designer. He brings order to things, and there's so much beauty in even little things, little tiny bugs and, big things that we sometimes awe at, like the sunset or sunrise, but don't always stop to acknowledge it. It's just being more intentional to see the things right in front of us.
Yes.
And so because we live such busy lives, it's so easy just to fly by and drive quickly and miss it all. And so my heart is that people would slow down just a little bit and take account of the things around them and really step into it and see the designer.
Yeah,
so.
It's beautiful. And it makes my mind go to a Job series that I recently did at the church where, in the book of Job and all of its chapters where there's a back and forth, Job loses everything. And it's just a total book about suffering and the things that he went through and losing his family and losing all of his possessions, his material wealth and all that. And then a group of 3 friends come in and offer the worst advice and the worst thoughts on opinions and everything. And it's just this back and forth that just becomes mind-numbing. And then you get to a point where Job, he never curses God, but he comes about as close as you can get. And he's just kind of telling God, I feel like you throw me under the bus. These are my words. I'm paraphrasing here. But and what God does when God finally speaks at the end of the book, God points to nature.
He does.
And God says, were you there?
Yeah.
And he starts listing all the things in nature that he says, I did this. Were you there? No. I did this. Were you there? No. And goes through all that. And so it's right in line with what God does. And as you and I even talk right now, and we're outside of this studio, there's a whole world going on.
Right.
And we get so caught up in our own worlds and think that the world is revolving around us. And I think what you just said is that God's like always in his words encouraging us. Will you step back?
Yeah.
And rest.
Yeah.
And just see, I got this.
Yeah. Totally.
And so I just think it's so powerful. So, but thank you so much for being here and doing this. We are your first podcast. First of more to come. I'm praying for you.
Oh, thank you.
And Again, the book is called Nature Unveiled. I'm holding it up right here. 40 Reflections on Experiencing God's Creation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This is a treat. So I'm really grateful.
Well, fun. So when the next stuff comes out, we'll have you come back for return episodes and all that stuff.
Excellent.
All right. She is Jill Smith, and the book, again, Nature Unveiled. Get it out here. What's the release date?
October 10th.
October 10th. It is going to be available everywhere. So go make sure you pick up a copy, and then the next 40 days, you got your devotion.
That's right. That's right. Excellent.
All right. Thank you, Jill. We have Josh Huisman podcast episodes streaming every Monday with great guests like Jill. And be sure to follow, click like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Click notifications, and you'll get more great content like this. So anyway, all right. Have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.